We've spent so much time talking about Israel that we forgot about Jacob. See, Israel was the promise, the blessing. Israel was the new name, the man God would build a nation through, the redemption story. But before Israel was ever whispered, before an angel was ever wrestled, before a limp became holy, there was Jacob. And Jacob is a lot easier to recognize. See, Jacob is the man who knew better and did it anyway. Jacob is the woman carrying a secret that nobody knows. Jacob is the addict who swore this was the last time. Jacob is the father wishing he could take back that one moment. The conversation replaying at 3 a.m. Jacob is the mistake, the shame, the regret, the thing we wish we could take back. Because Jacob wasn't misunderstood. He deceived. He manipulated. He stole his brother's blessing. He lied to his father. He crossed lines that should never have been crossed. And eventually he found himself exactly where so many of us are. Running from consequences, running from yesterday, running from a version of himself that he couldn't escape. And maybe that's why I love this story so much. Because most of us don't relate to Israel. We relate to Jacob. We know what it's like to look at the wreckage behind us and wonder, did I go too far? Did I ruin it? Did I miss my chance? Can God still do something with somebody like me? And eventually Jacob finds himself alone. No family, no crowd, no excuses, and no one left to blame. Just a stone beneath his head and an open sky above him. And maybe that's the moment we all eventually face. Because the stone isn't just a stone, it's a mirror where the reflection is your soul, not your face, not your reputation, not the version of you that everyone else knows, your soul, the you underneath the smile, underneath the accomplishments, underneath the church clothes, underneath the excuses, the you that only shows up when the room gets quiet. See, Jacob met that man on the stone. And maybe that's why God met him there too. Because when the running stops, when the noise died down, when the performance ends, you're finally left staring at the one person you can't outrun. You. And there Jacob is, looking in the mirror, seeing a deceiver, seeing a runner, seeing a man who crossed the line, seeing a man wondering if he'd done too much. And maybe you've been there too. But maybe your stone looks like a hospital room. Or maybe it looks like divorce papers. Or maybe your stone looks like an addiction. Or maybe for some of you, it looks like a funeral. Maybe it looked like the moment that everything finally fell apart. The place where you laid your head and whispered, God, did I go too far? And that's what wrecks me about this story. Because while Jacob is staring at the stone, God is opening heaven. Not after Jacob fixes himself. Not after Jacob earns forgiveness. Not after Jacob becomes Israel. But while he's still Jacob, while he's still carrying guilt, while he's still running, while he's still wondering, God shows up. Because grace has always been willing to go places that religion is afraid to enter. And suddenly the question isn't, can God still find me? The question becomes, what happens when he does? Years pass. And Jacob begins learning what many of us eventually learn. God's mercy doesn't always erase the story. Sometimes it redeems it. Jacob, the deceiver, meets Laban, the deceiver. The man who once manipulated gets manipulated. The man who once tricked gets tricked. The man who once took advantage learns what it feels like to be taken advantage of. Not because God hates him, but because God is shaping him, forming him, and teaching him. See, the blessing wasn't removing the struggle. The blessing was using the struggle. Until one night, Jacob finds himself alone again. Only this time he isn't running. This time he's wrestling. Not for success or wealth or reputation. He's wrestling for a blessing. He's wrestling for a new name. He's wrestling because the man he used to be can't carry the future that God is calling him into. And somewhere in the middle of that struggle, God asks a strange question. He says, "What's your name?" As if God doesn't know. As if heaven hasn't known all along. But Jacob has to say it. Jacob, the deceiver, the runner, the liar, the man carrying all the history, the man carrying all the regret, the man who thought he'd crossed the line, Jacob. And only after he tells the truth about who he is does the new name come. See, the blessing wasn't waiting on perfection. The blessing was waiting on honesty. And maybe that's where some of us are right now. Not at the blessing. Not at the new name. Not even at the wrestling match. Just laying our head on the stone and looking in the mirror, wondering if grace still knows our name, wondering if God is still writing, or if we've done too much. And maybe heaven's answer has always been the same. No, you're still Jacob, but I'm not finished writing. Because before Israel ever existed, God was already pursuing Jacob. And if God can meet a deceiver on a stone, if God can wrestle with a runner, If God can build a nation through a man who thought he'd gone too far, then maybe your worst chapter isn't your final chapter either. Maybe the stone isn't where the story ends. Maybe it's where the story finally begins.